The poll is up here just really quick so you guys can take note of the link to get to Expression U. And also letting you know on the control panel for GoToWebinar on the right side of your screen, there's a panel for questions. If you have questions for us, that's the one place that we're paying attention and monitoring. I will do my best to moderate those questions, and I will feed them to Andrew in between sessions of the training today. So if there are questions, that's probably where they're going to get answered. If there's something simple, I may answer it for you directly and take a couple of them and mention them to the group. But I will be responding to you directly in there. The chat session gets a little busy sometimes, so I try not to let that one dominate what we're doing. So do me a favor, and questions go in the questions box. That's where I'm going to see them. And I can't fix audio problems. We've had some people who during the sessions suddenly tell me they can't hear audio, and I can't figure out why you're doing that, and nobody else seems to know about it. It might be an audio setting on your computer, but we are monitoring this, and you'll notice that if somebody says they're having audio problems, I'll get other folks telling me that the audio problems are not there. So we'll let that through. I'm going to take this poll down because it looks like everybody has voted. So we'll close that off, and that will probably bring back some web cameras. And there's Andrew Sampson. He's our presenter for the day and will walk us through. And for those of you who've been around, Andrew is the originator of Expression U. So we generally tease him about being the grandpappy of the product line. And he is also one of the Zen masters of Tessera, and he's a lead on the Ross Video live sports and live events team. And they have been visiting different stadiums around the planet and installing Tessera, so you probably couldn't have found a better person to walk you through this. So we're just going to give everybody here a couple minutes, and we'll get started at 5 after the hour. So we'll just hang loose for a little bit, and while we're waiting, I'm going to put up a different poll for you guys to vote because we do want to take your input and choose what the next subject will be from the webinars. So hang loose, and we'll be back with you guys in just a couple minutes. While you're waiting, make sure you vote. Looks like about 3/4 of you have voted for what you would like to see in the next set of Expression U work from home seminars. So please let us know. This is how we choose the subjects for the webinars, and this is also how we rank and prioritize them. The ones that are most popular, we'll do this session now, and we'll do the exact same session in about 8 hours. 7 hours, and what we try to do is the most popular choice out of each one of these polls is we take the information from both sessions. That's what directs us to what our next webinar is, which is why sometimes you're wondering why it takes us a little bit and we only give you a couple of days notice. That's why. We're trying to space these out. We were going to do these once a month, but we figured now is a great time, so we're trying to get them done now to let you guys have access to this content while you have your time available to you. All right, so let's close this off, and I think everybody's ready to get started, and I think we're going to have everybody here joining us that's here. So we're getting ready. So let's kick us off with our first set on Tessera. And here we go.
Hi everybody, my name is Andrew Sampson with the Sports and Live Events team here at Ross Video, and welcome to this Expression Work From Home webinar where we are going to be covering an introduction to Tessera with a specific focus on applications for sports stadiums. Specifically, your typical sort of main display, but at an odd aspect ratio, and then also a ribbon display, fascia, a field level ribbon that you'd see on a soccer field, that kind of sort of very wide but not very tall aspect video canvas. So we're going to be doing three things. We're going to be building a scene to play back this clip. So if we go ahead and take a look at this, this is a 3840 by 1080 video clip, basically like an intro video, right? So we're going to be building a scene to play back this element and then to span it across two outputs. So we're going to use Tessera to stitch together multiple outputs to play back this clip. So that's going to be our first task. Our second task is to play the complementary ribbon that goes along with that intro video. So if we take a look at this, same sort of style, but obviously a much wider aspect. Okay. So that clip, if we go ahead and look at the media info for it, that clip is 15,360 pixels wide by 80 pixels tall. Okay, it's 5994. All the clips we're working with today are 5994, so based on a progressive video format. But the same would apply if you're working in 2997 or whatever. The frame rate's sort of irrelevant here. You just want to make sure your project matches that format. So we're going to be playing these two clips first separately. So we're going to build scenes that are separate to play back these two clips. And then I'm going to show you a technique for building a master scene where we basically build one template in Expression where we can apply multiple clips to it and use it as a single take item execution. So if you think of it in terms of like your stadium or your large venue, it would be one element you play from your sequencer that covers up multiple display surfaces in your venue. So this can be done in both ways. You can either build two items that you take independently, or you can build one item that you take that plays across multiple displays. And we're going to show you how to do both. And we're going to show you how to use the Tessera region mapper to handle both of those scenarios. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to build from scratch a little scoreboard, like a typical team versus team scoreboard, down distance, time, period, that kind of thing, that would sit on the ribbon display, maybe somewhere in the middle, maybe offset to the left or the right. But we're going to build a small scene that handles that purpose, and we're going to show you how to use the region mapper to place a piece of content like that on an additional layer on the same display in a very specific region. Okay, so we're going to introduce you to a few concepts to start off with. First and foremost, in order to do this, you must have the Tessera feature set on your Expression system. You will know if you have it if you go to the Edit menu, you go to Tessera, and you'll see that these settings are available to you to enable. There's really not a lot to it, but the Tessera feature set allows us to do a lot of things. First and foremost, it allows us to take scenes of any size and any aspect ratio and effectively distribute them across multiple outputs. And this workflow can scale to multiple outputs across multiple engines. Okay, but the experience of mapping these scenes is the same regardless of whether you're working on a standalone Expression system, or single engine as we call it, or if you're working on multiple engines and spanning content across multiple outputs on multiple boxes that are all playing in sync with one another. Okay, the region mapping process is very much the same between those two workflows, with a few small differences that are more on the technical side of things. We're going to focus on the single engine workflow. So I'm working in a single instance of Expression Studio. I have 3 outputs configured. I have 3 virtual outputs configured. If you are working with an actual output card, right, you would see the actual outputs here. You'd see if it was a Matrox XMIO or a Matrox DSX-LE4 card, you would see the outputs listed here, or any of the other vendors that we support. So for starters, let's enable Tessera. So we're going to go to the edit menu. We're going to go to the Tessera menu. We're going to go to settings. Now mine's already enabled, but if it wasn't, this would be set to disabled. This is the default state. So Expression's just behaving as a normal 3-channel CG system right now. These 3 outputs would be behaving independently as frame buffers 1, 2, and 3. If I want to be able to start, using the Tessera feature set for region mapping, I just need to switch this from disabled to single engine mode. Right? And I'm specifically picking single engine mode because we are using Tessera in a single engine environment with one system. If we were working with multiple engines, that's when we would start, exploring these master and output node modes. We're not going to cover that today. We're just going to focus on the single engine side of things. So I'm going to pick single engine. And then there's a few settings here that we want to take a look at. We're just going to leave our engine ID set to 1. The region map selection. This is important. This is really a preference. So we haven't built our region map yet, but we're going to. And you can choose whether or not you want your region map, or the other way to describe it is the pixel map that you're building for your outputs. Do you want that embedded in your project, or do you want it to be global to this instance of Expression? So there's pros and cons to either one of these selections, right? A global region map means that I can have a region map basically built for this instance of Expression. Any project that I load on this system will adhere to that region map. So if you're working in a workflow where the region mapping is very stringent, we're always going to use the same region mapping. We're not changing the way we're positioning pixels on any of the displays based on the production. All the productions are going to follow the same region mapping design. Then we can use a global region map. Using region map from project allows you to embed the region map in a project, which means every time we load an Expression project, that region map will load with it. Which means you can load different projects for different productions, and there will be a corresponding region map with that. So a perfect example would be a stadium or a venue that has multiple teams that occupy the same venue, right? And they want to use different mappings on the displays based on the show that they produce for those 2 teams. Their scoreboards are in different places. Their closed captioning windows are in different locations on different displays, depending on whose production it is. That's a perfect example of where using project-based region mapping can be really advantageous, because I don't need to change the region map as a separate step of changing the project. The downside to using region map from project means that you now have 2 region maps in 2 projects, and they're not mirroring each other. So if I make a change to one region map and I know that exact same region map change needs to be made in the other project, I have to go and make that change manually in that project. So just be aware. It can create a little bit of duplication of effort depending on which method you choose. They're both totally acceptable. You got to pick the one that works best for what you're trying to accomplish. We're going to use region map from project. Okay, so we're going to choose that option. Okay, so Tessera is on. It's happening. All right, not a big difference, right? It still looks like Expression, and for the most part, it is. The big difference, right, is now we're going to be working with scenes that are not your typical 16:9 aspect ratio, right? So in my project, rather than just creating a new scene, all right, which would by default be 1920 by 1080 based on my project mode, I'm not going to use that option. I'm actually going to create a new, so I'm going to right click this time. So instead of hitting the new scene button, I'm going to right click new custom size scene. When we open up this menu for the new custom size scene, it's going to give us options to input a frame size and a height. Okay, so you can put in whatever values you want here. 3840 by 1080, 3840 by 540, whatever. Whatever the specific dimensions of the scene you want to build. Don't think of the size of your outputs necessarily as dictating how you build your scenes. You may want to build a scene that just occupies a little 500 by 500 square on a 1920 by 1080 output. If that's the case, build that scene at 500 by 500, because we're going to use the region map later on to position that scene on the output where we want it to render. So that's the beauty of this whole workflow. You build the content specific to the dimensions it needs to be. You don't build the content to the dimensions of the outputs. Okay, big difference. So I'm going to start with my scene that needs to be 3840 by 1080. So you can just plug in these values. You can also save these as presets. So for example, my 3840 by 1080 scene, I may want to save as a preset called full display. Full display. Okay. So now I have a list of presets. I can pick my project size, my default project size, which is 1920 by 1080, or I can pick full display that's 3840 by 1080. Okay, so you can populate that list with as many presets as you want. It's totally up to you. So we're going to go ahead and create this scene. All right, there it is. Here's our 3840 by 1080 scene. We're going to call this full board video. You can name it whatever you want. We're going to use this scene to play back full screen video clips on our imaginary 3840 by 1080 scoreboard. The next thing we're going to do is we need to build an object in this scene to contain the video clips that we're going to play from it. Okay, so we're going to build a quad. Here's our quad object. I'm going to give this quad object a name. We're going to call it clip, or whatever works for you, right? So clip, its width is going to be 3840 by 1080. Okay, so it's the full size of the scene. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is build a material to put on this object. We're going to build a new material. So new material. Okay, and on this material we're going to put a texture, and this texture is just going to be an image. Now I have this picture called clip placeholder, and it looks like this. Okay, we're going to set the object in our scene to maintain aspect ratio of texture, so that any asset I apply to that object will just maintain its original aspect ratio. So here it is, clip placeholder, clip drop zone, or clip placeholder. The reason I'm putting this on here is really just as a hint, right? If you're building out your show and you use this template, I'm going to want to know, okay, this hasn't been fulfilled. I haven't put a clip on this yet. This is a blank template awaiting a clip or an asset that I'm actually going to use in my show. So this is really just a hint to the user. You'll call this up in preview. If you see clip drop zone, you know that there's no media applied to this template, right? So it's sort of just a helper. The second thing we're going to do is add a video shader to this material. Okay. Now, what we're going to do here is not apply an actual video file to this video shader. We're going to add a video shader. We're going to leave it blank, no clip. But we're going to use this video shader to apply some default behaviors to this material in how we want any clip that gets applied to this template to behave by default. So I want any clip that gets applied to this scene to play once. I want it to automatically start, right? So as soon as we put the scene online, I want the clip to start. I want to take the scene offline at the end of the clip, and I want to adjust the scene director to match the clip length. And what that's going to do is it's going to change the duration of our scene to match the duration of our clip, always. So anytime we apply a different clip to this, the duration of the scene will adjust to match. So effectively what we've done here is we've made a material that's default behavior is to play a clip from beginning to end, and at the end automatically clear itself off the output. Okay. If we turned take scene offline, it turned off take scene offline at end, right? This scene would then hold on the last frame, right? Which there might be an application for. So what you might find yourself doing is building multiple versions of these templates, right? Like full board video, play once, full board video, loop, full board video, hold last frame. Depending on the needs of your production, you might find yourself building multiple templates to handle different behaviors, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But we're just going to start with those behaviors to begin with. The last thing we need to do in building this scene is publish this object. So we have this object called clip. We're going to go to template links and we're going to publish this object. Now, publishing this object means that it is now replaceable. I can now put different content onto that object, different images, different video clips, solid colors, any kind of replaceable media can be put onto this object now. Okay, so our scene is done. That's it. That is the end of scene creation for our full board videos. So we're going to go ahead and save this project. Okay. Now we need to build a region map. Okay, so this is 3840 by 1080. I have three 1920 by 1080 outputs. So there's obviously a discrepancy here. I can't put a 3840 by 1080 scene on a single 1920 by 1080 output. I need to effectively chop it down the middle and render one half on one output and another half on another output. And that's exactly what we're going to use the region mapper to do. So I'm going to give you an introduction to the region mapper to start off with. So we're going to go to Edit, Tessera, Region Map, and this will open the Region Map interface, which has nothing configured right now. Blank slate. Okay. So on the left-hand side, you have sources. On the right-hand side, you have destinations. And the thing you want to keep in mind, okay, sources, generally speaking, represent content dimensions or scene dimensions. It's probably the best way to describe it. If I have a scene that's 3840 by 1080, I'm going to need a source that is 3840 by 1080. Destinations represent actual outputs. So in our case, we have three virtual outputs that are 1920 by 1080. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just go ahead and build those destinations. Just get that step out of the way. So we're going to go into our region map. We're going to add a destination that's 1920 by 1080. I'm going to call this destination CH1, channel 1. Okay. And we're going to add another destination, and it's going to be CH2, and add another destination, it will be CH3. You can also give these more logical names. Like if I know, for example, channel 3 is where I'm going to play out my ribbon content, like that is going to be the output for the fascias. You could call this ribbon. Whatever works for you. There's no technical reason to use specific names. It's completely an organizational thing, so it's at your discretion. The next thing we're going to do is on each one of these destinations that we've built, we're going to actually assign them. So this is the more technical part. We're going to assign them to an actual output. So we're going to select channel 1, and then in this menu that says output node, I'm going to leave the node selected as local engine. So leave that as local engine. But we're going to change this from channel none to channel 1. Okay, and we're going to repeat this process for all three destinations. So we're going to go to destination 2, and we're going to make it local engine channel 2. And then ribbon will be local engine channel 3. So we have now mapped our destinations to the actual outputs on this system. Okay. And again, this is a global thing. This is not something specific to the scene. I don't have to rebuild this. I don't have to go through this whole process every time I build a scene. You're going to do a lot of work up front with your region map in most cases. And then as you build new scenes, you'll probably be adding new sources to your region map, but you won't be re-adding destinations. That's usually something that happens just at the beginning. Okay, so those are our destinations. The next step is we're going to build our source. So on the source side, I'm going to add a source. Okay. We're going to call this source, I don't know, full display. And our source won't be 1920 by 1080. We're going to change its virtual dimensions to be 3840 by 1080. Okay, so those are our dimensions for our source. Now we have to add something called a region. Okay, we need to be able to chop this scene into two pieces, one that'll render on channel 1 and one that'll render on channel 2. So below at the bottom of this window called the region editor, you're going to see a button that says add. So this add button relates to the region editor, and it means add a region. Okay, so we're going to add a region. That region is going to be 1920 by 1080. So here's region 1. Okay, you can name these regions. I recommend you name these regions because these region maps can get very elaborate depending on what you're trying to do. If you don't name your regions, you'll be hunting and pecking through all of these regions that are just called region 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And you won't really know what they are. So I'm going to name this region full display left. Okay, so that's that region. And I'm going to position it using these numeric values. You can also click and drag, and it will snap. There is a snapping function in here, and it will sort of snap to the edges or snap to other regions. But I like to use the numeric values here to reposition things. And the region editor the region editor 0 point is at the upper left-hand corner. Okay, so that's 0, 0, right? So Y 20, for example, would be 20 pixels down from 0. 0 would be aligned directly with the top edge of the canvas. Our X position, again, 0 based on the left edge. So if I position this at 0, it'll be on the left edge, which is where I want this region to be. So full display left. Okay. Now we're going to copy this region and paste it. And this will be full display right. And we're going to position it, again, 0 on the y-axis, but now 1920 on the x-axis, a full HD raster to the right of our left region. Okay, so full display left, full display right. Now the last step to this is in our source to destination mapping interface. Okay, so this is where we actually associate regions to specific destinations. So I'm going to assign full display left to channel 1, and I'm going to assign full display right to channel 2. And notice this drop-down menu populates with the destination names that we had previously created. So this menu is going to auto-populate as we make new destinations. So channel 2. All right, so that's it. We've built the region map now for our 3840 scene, and what we've basically done is say, take this scene, split it into 2 halves, play 1 half on channel 1, 1 half on channel 2. That's it for our 3840 by 1080 scene. So, okay. So we're ready to go, effectively, okay? There's a few other small tips that will make your life a lot easier. If you're familiar with working in Expression, which I hope most of you are to some level, you'll know that you can preset scenes when you build them to specific outputs and specific layers so that when they get added to the sequencer, they default to those settings. You can do the same thing with Tessera, but we're not going to be dealing with frame buffers. We're going to be dealing with our source names instead. So it's a little bit of a different concept, but kind of the same underlying idea. So if I go to my scene object, so full board video, I've selected my scene object here in the object manager. I'm going to go to the take item tab. I'm going to assign this to layer 500. I want, every time I play a full board video, I want it to play on layer 500. Okay. And then I'm going to navigate to a new tab that you will only see when Tessera is enabled. That is the Tessera tab. Okay. We're going to navigate to that tab, and we're going to set a default source template. Okay. So we're going to set this to full display. All right, and it tells you the aspect 32 by 9, 3840 by 1080, and you're going to see the end result. We're going to flip over to our sequencer, and I'm going to take this scene and I'm going to drop it into my sequence, and you're going to notice that it automatically assigns itself to layer 500 and output full display. Okay, so that's the end result of making those changes. So we're ready to go. We're ready to play this. And we're going to show you the outputs here. So we're going to go to our user interface with our outputs, and we're going to go ahead and take this scene online. And we're going to apply this clip, 3840 intro, to the publish field that we've created. Right, so I've navigated away from my materials tab to my video files, and I've just browsed the folder where that file exists. I'm going to double click on it. It's going to apply it to my object, and we're going to go ahead and take it. I've also enabled a column here in my sequencer called the countdown column. All right, if you turn that on or off, you're going to see this countdown appear, and that'll actually give us a duration. Now, because we had used our material and in our material we'd set it to adjust the scene director length to match the clip duration, we're going to see that countdown populate with the time remaining on the clip as it plays. All right, so we've created our 3840 by 1080 scene for playing back videos.
Okay, so that's been a really great presentation, kicking us off on how you would put together a Tessera scene using a Tessera SE workflow. For those of you who are not aware, Tessera SE, or single engine, is a tool for using Tessera within a single box as opposed to spanning across multiple boxes. Andrew's done a great job of showing us this. You might think this is something you'd only see in a stadium, but what he literally just laid out for you is very common in Europe, where they have monitor walls that the talent will walk in front of, and they'll set things up to walk past the monitor to highlight whatever their news content is. It's been something I find is very popular in Europe, and was starting to make its way across North America. So we'll see where that goes. Let me do one thing here real quick. I get asked quite a bit on these seminars where people can find these recordings, and I will show you here just a second. You're going to see Andrew and I sitting up here that you've already seen. This particular page is gotostage.com/channel/expression-u, and I will put the URL over in the chat window for everybody. But what I want you to see here is down at the bottom, all the webinars that we've done, both the early session and the late session, are also posted here. So if you want to go back later and see recordings of this, this is where you'll find it. You'll also see this is where we are posting all of the webinars as they are going to be scheduled. So this is someplace you want to head to. So again, let me put this into the chat session here so that you guys can all see it. The link that I just sent is how you get to this particular page so you can see all of this content and keep track of it, because again, there's a lot of material that's going on here. This lets you follow up and go back and review it at your own pace. And the individual session lessons will also be posted to Expression-U. They should be up later this afternoon or tomorrow. So if you want to watch the individual pieces, you'll have that opportunity to do that as well. You guys have not posted any questions yet, so as expected, Andrew has done a great job of explaining this. So let's move on to the second segment of our Tessera tutorials, and what we're going to be going through now is working with ribbon boards. So let's get that moving since there are no questions. And again, please feel free to ask them. We will get to them as they come in, and this is really a great opportunity for you guys to pick Andrew's brain, so use it.
Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of our Introduction to Tessera for Stadium Workflows webinar. In this part, we're going to be showing you how to build a scene as well as the corresponding region map to play back an extremely wide aspect ratio video clip that you typically see on a ribbon display or a field level LED display in a sports stadium. The next thing we're going to do is expand on this same concept. All right, we're going to build a scene this time that is for our ribbon display. So we're going to use that extremely wide aspect clip that's 80 pixels tall, and we're going to use that. We're going to build a scene for playing back that clip. So again, we're going to go into our layout, and we're going to follow pretty much the exact same steps, but we're going to do it at a different size. Okay. So if you remember from before, we went and looked at our video file, our SLE ribbon clip, and we looked at our media info for that clip. And it is 15,360 by 80. Okay, so we need to build a scene that's 15,360 by 80. I'm going to switch back to our user interface so we can focus in on that. We're going to build a new custom size scene, 15,360 by 80 pixels tall. All right, and you're going to see this very narrow scene. Right. Now you can zoom in on this. So in your viewport, you can use the zoom feature to zoom in on the canvas to varying levels, right? And then you can use the sliders to scroll back and forth. Okay, so we're going to build an object. It's going to be the exact same process. We're going to build a quad. This quad is going to be 15,360 by 80. It will have this clip material on it, right, with maintain aspect ratio, and we're going to do fit height, right? So there it is. We can also set this up as well depending on how you want this to look. Like we could go to our texture coordinates, for example, and we could set this to wrap, and then it'll just tile itself across the entire surface, right? Or we could build an image that's the correct size as well, and not just repurpose the same sort of placeholder graphic. But in the interest of saving time, I'm just going to use the same placeholder graphic, and I'm going to set the mode to wrap, right? So there it is. We can zoom back out, and we can see what we've created. We've basically built this big, sort of long, slender scene that we're going to use for our ribbon. Now we're going to apply the same technique. So I'm going to call this clip. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it ribbon clip, fascia clip, whatever makes sense for you. But in this case, it's the clip. We're going to publish it like we did our 3840 by 1080 scene. So it's a published object. And we are going to build a region map for it. Now this region map is going to be much more involved. Okay, you cannot fit a 15,360 pixel clip onto a 1920 by 1080 output. That's obvious, right? How do you fit that content onto an output? For those of you who may not know, all of the display processing systems out there that actually put video onto the LED displays themselves all rely on video coming in some kind of standard aspect ratio. If it's 1920 by 1080, it could be UHD, right? But very rarely or never are we sending a video signal to it that is actually this aspect ratio. So those display processors are expecting video to come in a striped format. So we basically take this and we sort of wrap it back on itself, and we make a bunch of horizontal stripes in order to fit all of this content onto a single output. And then that goes into the display processing unit, which then sort of unwraps it onto the display in a logical order, one stripe after the next, basically. So it looks seamless, but we're actually going to be building it into a striped layout for the output. Okay, so that's going to be the next step of the process. Now, how do we know how to build the stripes? In a perfect world, it would just be 1920 by 80 stripes, one after the other. But in reality, the stripes that we have to build are usually dictated by the LED manufacturer, and the LED manufacturer usually has to accommodate physical restrictions in the building. They might be going around a corner, which limited how many LED modules they could use in a row on that particular corner. So, and then they have to move to the next sort of segment, which is controlled by the next part of the processing. So we need a new stripe. So sometimes the stripes aren't necessarily full width. They're not always going to be 1920 by 1080. And what we typically see from the vendors who build these displays is they'll give us some kind of map to give us an idea of how we need to lay out the stripes. So I've made one that's completely fictitious. This is not from a real project, but just to give you an idea of what you might see. Okay. So here's a mapping that I've created. Right now, this sums up to 15,360 by 80, but we're being told to arrange it in this fashion, right? So here are our 0 points on the left-hand side, right? And then these are the individual stripes. So our first stripe needs to be 1920 by 80, starting at 0, 0. Our next stripe, 1920 by 80, starting at 0 and 80 on the y-axis. Our next stripe, 1920 by 80 and 0 and 160. The stripe after that's only 1800. So maybe there was like a camera nest here on the fascia, or they're going around a tight radius corner and they couldn't put as many cabinets together in that particular section. We don't know, but this is the map we have to adhere to. All right, so this is what we're going to be following. Now, we're going to go into our region map, and I'm going to show you a trick and a really nice feature inside of Tessera that allows us to actually use these images as a guide. All right, so I'm going to go into our region mapper. And this time we're going to be working on our destination 3, all right, channel 3, which is our ribbon, okay? And you'll notice that there's this option to load in a background, all right? So I can actually go and point this to an image. So I'm going to go to the file location where that exists. Okay, so here's our ribbon map. We're going to open that file, and it's actually going to load it in as a background on that destination. We're not going to ever see this on the output. It'll never render on the output, but I'm using this now as a guide for when I start building my regions. In fact, I can go ahead and just start building the regions, the destination regions, over top of this image. So why do we need destination regions? Well, we're going to need to build a source that's 15,000 by 360 and then translate it to a 1920 by 1080 output. So we're going to have to chop that scene up into multiple regions and then map that source onto a destination in multiple destination regions. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and start building these destination regions. I've loaded in my background, and I'm going to go ahead and just start adding regions. And I'm just going to use this image as my guide. So I'm going to add 1920 by 80. Okay. And we're going to call this stripe 1. Right? And I'm just going to place it right on top of that image, or use these number sliders here as well. So I can say 0 and 0, and you'll see it kind of lines up exactly with the background image for our first stripe. We're going to add another stripe, 1920 by 80, and its Y position is going to be 80. There's our next stripe. So this is stripe 2. And then we're going to add another region, 1920 by 80, and its Y position will be 160, and it will be stripe 3. Add another region. Now this one will be a little bit different. So instead of 1920 by 80, it's going to be 1800 by 80. So 1800 by 80. Its Y position will be 240, and its X position will be 0. And this will be stripe 4. And we're going to add another region, which will be 1920 by 1080. You can also copy these, by the way. So I can go to a previous stripe that I've created, copy it, paste it, and then just drag it down like this, and you'll notice they snap to one another. Or again, we can use the number values, the numeric values, to lock them into position. This is stripe 5. And then we're going to add another one. This is going to be 1800 by 80. And I'll kind of just roughly place it, and then I'll lock it in. So 0 and 400. And then we're going to add another one. That'll be 1920 by 80. Zero and 480. We're going to add another one that is 1920 by 80 right here. 0, 560. And then we're going to add our last one, which is just a small little sort of sliver. It's the end of that display. It's only 240 pixels wide. So we're going to add another one that's 240 by 80 and position it here. Oh, and I should have been naming these as I go. My bad. So this is stripe 6, stripe 7, stripe 8, and stripe 9. Okay, so there it is. We've built all of our stripes. We've positioned them accordingly. Our destination for the ribbon is done. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and build the source. Now you could have done this in either order, whatever you're more comfortable with, but the the image I had here for the background it was such a good visual guide, it just made it an easy place to start. And we can then use all of these values from this guide as our guide for building our source. Okay. So on the source side of things, we're going to build a new source. We're going to call this ribbon. Ribbon is going to be 15,360 by 80. Okay. And we can zoom in on this as well. So just like we can in our viewport, I can zoom in on this and then I can slide left and right. Okay. Now we have to build corresponding regions that match what we've done on the destination side. Okay, so I need to build 3 1920 by 80 regions in a row. All right, so we're going to go to our source. We're going to add 1920 by 80. Okay, it probably positioned itself here in the middle. This is stripe 1, right? So you can call these whatever you want. Section 1, stripe 1, region 1, totally up to you. I'm just going to match the same naming that I had on my destination. So stripe 1, it's going to be positioned at 0 and 0, right? So it's the leftmost 1920 by 80 region, all right? We're going to add another one. So add 1920 by 80, or actually we can copy stripe 1 and then paste it, which is actually easier when you're working on a wide canvas like this because it pastes it into the same location. And then I can just drag it to the right. So now it's at 1920 by 80. Okay, this is stripe 2. And then we'll copy. And remember, I need 3 of those in a row. 3 1920 by 80 sections in a row. So copy, paste. This is going to be stripe 3. Copy, paste. This section is our first 1800 wide section. So we're going to change its width to 1800 and then just drag it over. So this is stripe 4. Okay. Copy, paste. Now we're back to a 1920, which is stripe 5. So its width will be 1920 by 80. And it is stripe 5. And then we do another 1800. So paste. Stripe 6. Now I know stripe 5 was 1920, so I'm going to save myself a bit of work and I'm going to copy it and paste it. And then just drag it over like this. That way I don't have to adjust the dimensions again. So this is stripe 7. And then copy, paste. Stripe 8. And then our last one, 240, right? So we're going to add, well, actually we can just copy paste as well. Copy, paste, and then just make it 240. And this is stripe 9. Okay, and then we'll move it to the right. All right, so there it is. We've built all of our regions. Now we have to route these regions to the destination regions or map them to the destination regions. So just like we did on the 3840 scene, we're going to select each region and then we're going to route it to a destination. But this time, because we've actually built regions on our destination, we're going to see on the destination called ribbon, there's all of these regions that we've built. So rather than just mapping this to ribbon, stripe 1 is going to get mapped to ribbon stripe 1. Stripe 2 is going to get mapped to ribbon stripe 2, and so on. We're just going to follow this along. So stripe 3 is going to get mapped to ribbon stripe 3, and just repeat this process. So stripe 4 is getting mapped to ribbon stripe 4, stripe 5, ribbon stripe 5, stripe 6, ribbon stripe 6, stripe 7, ribbon stripe 7, stripe 8 is 8, and 9 is 9. All right, all done. All right, we've built our source. We've mapped our destination using our guide. This is all ready to go. We're going to click OK. If we save our project, we're saving our content and we're saving our region map. We've built the scene. Scene's ready to go. We should actually give this a name. Let's give this scene a name, ribbon. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and make sure we published. We did. We published the object. So we're ready to go. We can go into our sequencer now. Or excuse me, before we go to the sequencer, let's default this to the source like we did with full board. So if you remember with full board, we went to the Tessera tab and we set it to full. We set the source template to full display. We're gonna do the same thing for the ribbon, but in the Tessera tab for the scene object, we're gonna set this to ribbon, and then in the take item tab. So we're already playing full board video on layer 500. We defaulted that to 500. One thing to keep in mind, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but when you're working in Tessera, your outputs are now sort of acting as one sort of conglomerated output channel, which means you can't have two things on layer 500, even if it's playing on a different output. So my ribbons are going to use channel 3 and my main display are going to use channel 1 and 2. But because at any point we could use our region map to span those outputs, we have made the sort of decision in the software that you cannot have multiple things on the same layer, just to avoid any collisions and to avoid having to build a feature set around having to avoid those collisions. It's just one layer structure for all of your outputs. But the layers are unlimited, so it's really not that much of a hindrance because you can just make sure that you put things in logical groupings based on content. So like maybe my ribbons, for example, play on layer 200. Okay, so now there won't be a conflict. Layer 200, this is layer 500. Okay, so no issue there. So we'll go over to our sequencer. We'll drop in our ribbon. I'll switch so you can see our outputs. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and apply our SLE ribbon clip to that scene. And here's a very long, slender preview of the scene. Okay, we're going to go ahead and cue it and take it. Okay, and there it is playing on our LED output. And here's our full board video playing on our main display. There's our auxiliary LED playing on the LED output. Okay. Now we could also go ahead and put these inside of a group in our sequencer and set this group to take all. And if I put these two items then inside this group, I can take both of these items at the same time. We can also, just like regular scenes in Expression, we can apply default transitions to these. So I could go to my transition tab, I could put dissolves on the front and back. Let's make it, I don't know, 20 frames on the back and 20 frames on the front. And now when we take these are going to dissolve on and dissolve off. And that's pretty much it. So we've built our scenes for playing back that content. Pretty straightforward. And now we can just reuse these over and over again. So you could use this template as many times as you need to, right? Each time applying, different content to it or different images to it. Just make multiple copies of this item in your sequencer, apply different videos to it, and you're ready to go. You're effectively building your show at this point with these two templates. One for your ribbon and one for your main display.
Okay, that was pretty awesome. And again, a lot of you are going to feel that going into these particular types of workflows is really stadium centric, but I can tell you that I've already seen some stations that are doing ribbon boards in their newsroom, and they're running them, for example, behind the anchor desk where it used to just be, for example, Action News and a station logo is a Duratran. or a fixed image. They're now using this to do dynamic content around their shows. So again, just something to think about. We had a couple questions come in. I'm going to throw this at Andrew. I'm going to make him presenter so he can share his screen and show us how this question can be answered. And it's a two-parter actually. The first part of the question, Andrew, you should be able to present on this now. The question came up and it's two parts. First off, they're asking about when will we be able to see clips in the layout section of Expression, and that's really more of a product question. And the second part of it is how can you use clips as a source or material inside of Tessera? And I know that you've done some stuff using the new data link functions in version 10 coming up with it. Is there a way to use that now?
Yeah. Can you guys see? Can you see my screen, Patrick? I just want to make sure.
We do see your screen.
Yeah. So I want to address the question about the clips workflow in general first, just so everyone is kind of aware. So, and Alexander brought up a good point about how on, for example, a graphite, you can have expression clips and you can have an expression Tessera license. So how can those two things work together? How can those two feature sets work together? And the answer is that there's common features from expression clips that can be used in a virtual server channel workflow and in a Tessera workflow. So for example, and what I show in the demonstration video that we're using for the webinar is actually sort of atypical to how we would actually do this in practice. Most customers would actually leverage the clip store workflow to fulfill assets in these templates. Now, we still rely on using an expression template as the basis for your playout, but if we go ahead and open our clip browser, these are the clip assets in our clip browser that are ingested through our encoder. These are all features that are part of the clips suite of tools, and most users will actually use assets from their clip store to fulfill templates and expressions. So for example, if I wanted to find, let's see, our abacus. So here's like our abacus ribbon clip, for example. I can, just like I double clicked on a file in a local folder to fulfill this template, I can drag and drop from the clip store and drop that asset onto my template and then go ahead and play that to my region. And now I've taken my abacus clip and mapped it to my ribbon display. All right, so now the big benefits to using the clip store workflow instead of just local files from a folder is our clip store supports all kinds of different metadata features. So for example, if I wanted to go and trim that abacus clip and set different in and out points, or set different looping behaviors and different multi-point loops and things like that, like features that are specific to our clip store workflow and the metadata tagging that exists within that, that will now apply to my template. So when I drag and drop this clip from the clip store to that object, those flags that I've set inside the clip store will now apply, which is super powerful. The other thing that's super powerful about using the clip store workflow to fulfill these elements is you can synchronize your clip stores from in a multi-engine environment. So the whole idea with Tessera, and I didn't really touch on it in the first video because I really wanted to keep this sort of laser focused on region mapping and sort of the general nuts and bolts of how we do pixel mapping in Expression. But this can obviously be expanded to multiple engines. So your region map can address multiple outputs on multiple boxes. And the clip store has a built-in synchronization feature where the database can be passed, can be replicated across multiple engines, and the assets can be replicated across multiple engines. So anything that you ingest can get automatically synchronized across all of the engines in your array, or all of the nodes that you have in your Tessera setup. So that's another big advantage to using the clip store workflow. So I guess sort of long story short, you'd use a template-based workflow for doing anything odd aspect, right? Using assets from the clip store. And then anything that would be like 16:9, for example, that you just want to play out of a server channel, you can do that as well. And you can use elements from your clip store for both, basically, interchangeably between both.
The other big advantage to sort of this template-based workflow with Tessera is very often people are combining real-time content, so things with real-time animations, real-time data, you know, a more traditional graphics template and expression on these same regions. So you might be going back to back on a region from you know, a live statistics template to a video clip, for example, and I want to be able to perform transition logic between those two scenes, for example, between that video clip and now this real-time template that I'm playing. That's really only possible by using the template-based workflow. You lose that functionality once you go to using server channels in expression clips. So we kind of made a calculated decision there to sort of reserve this, you know, this type of functionality to a more template-based workflow, but being able to use assets from our clip store. The other thing that you can do, and Patrick alluded to it, everything I've shown you so far has been manual, where I just manually drag and drop an asset or I double click on a file to fill it in the template. We can also automate this stuff to a degree, either through scripting, through data link. So you can actually data link objects in Expression, which I'm sure a lot of you know. But we've also added a new feature in Expression called dynamic materials. And dynamic materials allow you to basically go to an object, you can go to this data link tab and you can set it to dynamic material. And in this dynamic material field, you can basically put in a portion of a file path that you want to then fulfill with a dynamic piece of information, like info from a text object. So for example, I could put in a text object and this could be called, let's call this ID. And if you remember earlier, I was looking at my clip store. So if we go and look at the clip browser, put on my other display here. So here's our clip browser. Here are the clips that are currently in my, that I've been looking for example, my Abacus clip. Now, all of these clips get recall IDs, which you can define. These recall IDs can also get set on ingest. So as soon as you ingest a clip, it could be automatically assigned a recall ID. But let's say, for example, I just call this Abacus. Okay. I'll go ahead and save that recall ID. And then on our clip object inside our dynamic material, we're going to set the material path to be recall ID. And let me just double check something here. I believe this also belongs to a project called 2018 Sports Demo. So I'm just going to copy that. So 2018 Sports Demo : now I'm going to use whatever text happens to be in this text object to fulfill the ID, right? So I'm going to change this. This last part's going to be at ID at. All right. So that's going to indicate that whatever text, whatever string is held in this text object is what I want to use.
Did we lose you? It's like we might have lost Andrew. Either that or you all lost me, one or the other. We lost Andrew. Okay. I'll try and fill in here quickly. What he's going to do is in that text field that he's got there labeled ID, he will put in a spot where you can choose the name for the asset that you have. So he would be putting in Abacus. Yeah, Andrew said his laptop just died. And what he would do is he would put in the word Abacus and it would show the Abacus clip name because his recall ID instead of a number is a name. So he would put an Abacus. If he had a different one, maybe it's Samson Soda. He would put Samson Soda in there and that's what would populate that. And that's how you could use your clip store as a material that would work even within a Tessera workflow. So hopefully that answers the question. Andrew will be back in just a bit, but we'll get that going, and maybe he'll have something else to address here. But in the meantime, I'm going to take control of this back, and I will kick us off into the next segment here. And this is where Andrew's going to show us a little bit of best practices on moving forward with some of this content.
Hi everybody. In part 3 of our Introduction to Tessera webinar, we're going to show you how to combine the steps from part 1 and part 2 into a single conglomerated scene that will allow you to play back both your wide aspect ratio ribbon and your main video board content using one scene and one take item in Expression. All right, we're back here on the layout side of Expression, and I'm going to show you a technique now for building a conglomerated scene. Okay, that's going to have both our main display and our ribbon in one scene. Okay, now what are the advantages to this? The biggest advantage is by building a template like this, I have one item that I need to trigger. So when this comes down to controlling it from your production switcher or building a dashboard panel to trigger all of these things, I only now have one ID to remember, one item to trigger. It's also going to help with things like synchronization because I don't have to worry about queuing and taking two items to come online at the same time. I can just play one item, and that one item will just inherently be synchronized no matter what we do. Right? Now, you can make multiple items synchronized as well. That's not necessarily an issue, but there's just more things to consider to make sure that that consistently happens. So one item can certainly be more predictable in terms of how that would work out. So I'm going to go ahead and build a new scene. And to shortcut this, I'm going to duplicate my full board video scene because I'm going to use this as the basis for this sort of full takeover scene. So we're going to duplicate this scene and we're going to call this full takeover. Now, because this is a conglomeration of both the ribbon and the main display, the scene's dimensions are going to have to change to accommodate both pieces of content. Okay, so this scene is 15,360. This scene's 1920. Okay, so, or sorry, 3840. So the first thing we're going to do is right-click and convert dimensions, and we're going to make this scene 15,360. Now it's not going to be 1080 because I also now need to add 80 pixels of vertical onto this scene to accommodate the placeholder for the ribbon. Right? So it's actually going to be 1160. 15,360 by 1160. Okay. So now the scene has gotten much larger. Obviously, our little video board, our main video looks sort of orphaned in the middle of the scene. We're going to go ahead and change the name of this object. This is now going to be called main. Call this main display clip. And I'm going to make a few adjustments here to make it easier to position. All right, so that's the first thing we're going to do here. So I'm going to adjust its pivot points because I want to easily just stick it to the left edge of this scene to make my region mapping easier to deal with, first and foremost. So what I'm going to do is go to my transform tab for this object. I'm going to go to its pivots. Now this object's 3840 by 1080. So to position the pivot, which is currently right in the middle, I'll zoom in so you can see this. So we'll zoom out a little bit, I guess. Too far. Still too far. Okay, so our pivot is directly in the center. I'll back up even more. Now I want to position this on the left edge. So I'm going to set the X pivot to 1920, negative 1920, excuse me, and the Y pivot to positive 540, which will put the pivot point right on the upper left hand corner of this object, which is just going to make my life easier for now positioning it in the upper left corner of the scene. Okay, so I'm going to position this at 0 and 1160. Okay, done. Now I'm going to go to my ribbon scene. I'm going to grab the quad that I created there, clip. I'm going to copy it, go to my full takeover scene, paste it, and there it is. Now it positioned itself exactly in the right spot because it copied its coordinates over from the other scene, which would have been 40 on the y-axis, which just happens to align with 40 here. So it actually worked out perfectly. Not entirely planned, but I'm happy it worked out that way. Now, of course, we could always go and adjust its position, but that is exactly where I want it to be. I want it to be at 40 on the y-axis, directly underneath our main video placeholder. So now I've built this conglomerated scene, right, that I can now apply 2 clips to and play as one take item from our sequencer, right? So we're going to go into our region mapper. Now we have to build a new source to accommodate this new scene. So I'm going to go into my region mapping. We're going to reuse, though, a lot of the elements from the other regions that we've already built, the other sources we've already built. So we're going to go ahead and build a new source. It's going to be 15360 by 1160. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead and copy these regions. So copy full display left and paste. Copy full display right, paste. And notice how they're actually positioning themselves at 0, 0, right? Because that's where they were positioned. And our coordinate system in the region mapper is 0 based in the upper left-hand corner. So copy and pasting these regions from source to source will put them in the same relative position, even if the source you built is much wider in this case, right? So very handy. So we're going to go ahead and start copying. Oh, and when we copy and paste these, their mappings also move with them. So notice when I pasted region 1, it mapped itself to channel 1. Region 2 mapped itself to channel 2, right? So their destination mappings follow as well. So saving us a whole bunch of time. You still have to go and rename these. We don't assume you want to keep the same names. So you have to go and name these after the fact. So this would be, main left, main right. So we'll go ahead and copy our stripes. So stripe 1, copy, paste. Now this one's a little different. The 0 position in this source relative to this source, right, is at it's the upper left of both of these sources. So this one's going to require us to make some changes. These are actually going to have to move, right? So region 1, which is stripe 1. So stripe 1 is going to have to move to 1080 on the y-axis to be underneath main left and main right. So we're going to have to do an extra step on all of these ribbon sections. So we're going to copy stripe 2, paste, and then position at 1080. And then we're going to copy stripe 3, paste, and position at 1080. And just rinse, repeat. So paste 1080. Okay. Oh, I think I pasted region 3 twice in a row. My bad. Oh, this guy. Copy. Paste. Or excuse me, that was right. So we'll just keep doing this. 1080. Copy. Paste. 1080. Copy. Paste. 1080. Paste. 1080. Almost there. Last 2 here. Copy. Paste. 1080. And the last one, our little 240 section, paste, and 1080. So you can go through and name these after the fact if you want, right? This would become stripe 2. And this would become stripe 3. Stripe 4. Also name them as you go, I suppose. Might have saved me some time. Stripe 6. Seven. Stripe 8. And stripe 9. Okay, all done. So the beauty of this now, I showed you guys earlier, we went over to the sequencer. I'm going to switch back to our playout interface so we can see both of our outputs and our UI. So before, I had to take these, as separate items basically, right? They're two separate take items in our sequencer. Now you can merge them together with a take all group, right? But now to play 2 items, it takes 3 items basically because I need to create a group every time. It's just more work, more manual labor in the sequencer organizing all of this stuff into groups. Where with the full takeover variant, so I'm going to make a new group and we'll just call this, full takeover. And we'll put our full takeover scene in there, and I'm going to apply 2 clips to it. We're going to apply our intro to the main display, and we're going to apply our ribbon to the ribbon. And now I have one item that I actually need to assign to a different source. So I actually forgot one step in here in our region map. I want to name this. I don't want this to be called source 1. This should be called, full takeover or something to that effect. Okay, so now we're going to play this on full takeover, or we could have preset it on the layout side, but I'm going to go ahead and take this. And now with one take item, I'm playing both of these pieces of content on multiple displays, completely in sync from one graphic, basically, from one expression template.
Okay, so that was kind of an interesting way to show you how to do a full takeover. Very interesting thing to do there. We got a couple other questions that have come in here. Andrew, I think you can see these questions as well, but I will also make you presenter so that you can share your screen, because I think you'll have a couple things here you want to walk everybody through. First off, I answered the question is because we lost you there midstream. Where you were showing the data link tool there, I was basically saying you're using that ID field as a text string, and that's what you were using for putting in the Abacus clip. Don't know if you wanted to pick up on that one, but I think everybody got it. Questions coming in. Can you have overlapping regions?
Yes. We'll get to, I actually want to address one of the questions that was asked a bit earlier, and then we'll get into the overlapping regions. Okay. But one of the questions was asking about empty space in your regions. And is there a cost from a performance standpoint of using multiple smaller sources versus using one big source? And the answer is no. The system only renders what's been defined in your regions. Rather than rendering the entire source. So if there's nothing defined in that region, then we don't waste resources rendering it, so no. So it's really more of a workflow question, like if you want to build a source region to, like for that full takeover example that has a bunch of negative space in it that we're not using, there's not really a premium that you pay for that. But it just allows you to combine scenes together. And as far as overlapping regions, yes, you can. And there are a lot of reasons why you may have overlapping regions. Oftentimes it has to do with having to replicate content onto multiple destinations. So for example, I may want to create two different mappings, and we're actually the next part of the next video we're going to show is going to talk specifically about this scene, this little sort of fictional scoreboard scene. So this is 800 wide by 80 tall, right? Now you may want this scene to get mapped onto two destinations, right? It may have to appear on your north-facing display and your south-facing display. Those displays might be two different dimensions, but I want to use the same graphic, right? So in your region mapper, so we could go to our scoreboard region. You'll see that this scoreboard region already has two regions defined on it. I can actually create another region on top of all of this that's, let's say, 800 by 80. Okay, and we'll call this full score. Right? Now, full score might get mapped to, let's say, channel 1 to a region that's 800 by 80. And it's, you know, here, just random. I'm just going to position it randomly, you know, sort of in space there. And then with that same, I didn't mean to leave my region. So in that same source region, I'm going to map full score to channel 1, region 1. And then score left and score right are still mapped to ribbon score left and ribbon score right. So we're actually mapping this one thing, this one graphic, to 3 different destination regions on 2 different destinations. So there's a lot of layering that you can do there. So if I go ahead and bring our scoreboard into our sequencer and take this online, and we look at our outputs, you'll see that it's being mapped to output 1 as one full stripe, and it's being mapped to output 3 in 2 sections using overlapping regions. Okay. Cool. You can also overlap regions on your destinations, which will create it will actually cause graphics to overlay one another, and then that's determined by your layering, right? So if you have 2 regions on a destination that overlap one another, whichever graphic is on the higher layer would be in front, right? And the graphic on the lower layer would be behind, and vice versa, right? So that answers that question.
Okay. I'm going to come back up here to question from Matthew. Performance considerations when using one large source region versus multiple smaller ones.
Yeah, so I think I addressed that one off the top, but you know, the example that we just showed of having a source that looks like this that has a bunch of unused space in it versus using 2 sources like this that have no unused space. Is this more efficient than this? No. In fact, sometimes a conglomerated source like this can actually be more efficient because we're basically rendering the whole thing in one pass versus rendering 2 sources separately as 2 passes. So really, it's negligible, the difference, I would say, but you certainly don't pay a penalty for having this big empty space in your source region in terms of rendering.
Okay. Sorry to make you repeat that one. I just want to make sure we answered it directly from Matthew. And we're getting a question from Alexander. He's asking basically about a product question about having multiple groups, and he wants to nest a group inside of a group. Interesting concept. I think it brings up a lot of things we have to pay attention to, and I think you've even figured that part out. But it's something we can definitely take to the development team and see what they have to say about it.
Yeah, I will say our answer to that, that would be nice. I think that would be a cool feature. But what we typically do for that kind of workflow, which is actually, I guess, more typical than building these take-all groups. We actually use these take-all groups fairly rarely. Because a lot of these productions are controlled from dashboard panels, for example, where someone will build a button and then that button then triggers a whole bunch of graphics and expression. So multiple items can get queued, for example, right? Like you could have 2 items and they could both be queued, and then they can be taken at the same time. So effectively manually doing a take all group without having a take all group. And then you can have multiple, take items that are going to get played together in the same sequence group, right? So like these could be, these could be the two elements for our show open, and I'll just color them, right? And then these are two elements for, break one, for example, right? That are going to get played together. They're not nested in their own group, but we are going to play them as sort of associated pieces of content. So there are ways to do it. It does take a little bit of extra effort right now, and being able to nest take all groups inside of a group, I would acknowledge that would be a cool feature. Yes.
Yeah. It's been talked about, no question. What happens when you do a full takeover online after this? I think this one comes back to layering again. Gerard is asking a question about what happens when you take a full takeover online and after that is played, take take only the scene where the ribbon is on air. Will the full display be cleared?
It will be, yes. And that is because of something I mentioned a bit earlier. So let's say, for example, we play full takeover, right? So we're playing all of our outputs with one take item. And then let me arrange these in the correct order so it kind of makes sense as to what we're seeing. And then I'm going to build another ribbon. And that ribbon will use our, I guess, abacus clip from before. Okay. So the only way that would wind up clearing the full takeover is if I had them assigned to the same layer. All right, so full takeover is assigned to 500, right? The abacus ribbon is assigned to 200. So what I can actually do is while the full takeover is playing, I could trigger the abacus ribbon, right? When full takeover concludes, it will actually now reveal to the abacus ribbon that's playing underneath it on 200, which you'll see here in a second. Once this clip finishes someday, or I could just take it offline, I suppose, right? And you'll see that the abacus ribbon is actually online underneath that on another layer. If I had them on the same layer, one would replace the other. So if I assign this to 500 as well, and I played full takeover, and then I played the abacus ribbon, it's going to interrupt these two scenes. And this is behaving a little bit different because I'm using my virtual outputs rather than actual outputs. But what would happen in reality is full takeover would get completely replaced by ribbon because they're playing on the same layer, right? So to avoid those kinds of conflicts, you just put things on different layers. It depends on what you want to have happen. But we treat the entire set of outputs as one layer structure when you're working in Tessera. That's really one of the big differences between a traditional multi-channel CG workflow with Expression and using Tessera is all the outputs are treated like one big frame buffer with one common layer structure. So it's just important to understand that. And that was a conscious decision that was made because we thought it might get very confusing because you could have scenes that might span multiple outputs and then certain scenes that don't. And you'd have to know what scenes do and what scenes don't to determine whether or not there'd be collisions on the specific frame buffers. And it could get very difficult to manage, especially across a system with many, many outputs. So it was definitely a calculated decision that was made to sort of unify them all as one layer structure and treat it all like one frame buffer, just to make it easier to understand and work with.
Cool. So we got to most of those there. And we want to get to the next section here because as Andrew was hinting, we're going to show you how to play with the scoreboard. He's going to build a quick one and show you how to put it up on layers. He's kind of teased you with that already, but this way you'll get the full effect of what he's been showing you. So let me change back over here and we will get that section going on here in just 1 second.
Hi everybody. In part 4 of our Introduction to Tessera webinar, we're going to show you how to build a very simple scoreboard graphic and then how to use the region mapper to combine that with content already playing on our ribbon display using multi-layering. Now the last thing we're going to show you guys today is building a more traditional graphic, something that's going to use text objects and things like that in expression for like a little scoreboard. A scoreboard interface that's going to exist on our ribbon. So the next thing we're going to build is our scoreboard scene. Now this is going to be basic. This is not going to be a design class on how to build a scoreboard. So this is not going to be the prettiest looking thing you've ever seen. But more than anything, it's going to be focused on how we map this to a region and get it onto the output in a specific location. So I'm going to go ahead and build a new custom size scene. Now how big do I want my scoreboard to be? Let's say 800 by 80. Sorry, 800 by 80. Okay, so this is going to be our little score strip that goes on our ribbon. So what does a score strip typically consist of? Well, you're going to have your home and away score, right? So those need to have some kind of look and feel to them, right? With our team logos or colors, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just quickly build our home team and away team objects. So I'm going to go ahead and build a group. And this group is going to be called V team. So V team group. Inside V team group, we're going to have a quad. And that quad is going to be called V color. And it's going to be 80 pixels tall. And I don't know. Yeah, 200 works. That's good enough. So conveniently, I have some materials ready to go here. And we'll share this project with you so you'll have these assets as well. But I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder. And we're just going to call this logos, let's say. And we'll make a new image, and this image is going to be our visiting team color. So Seattle's primary color. Okay, there it is. Now we want our visiting team logo. So this will be V logo. And we'll make another new material. And this will be Seattle's logo. And we're going to set it to maintain aspect. And we're going to up the texture coordinates here so it's kind of, a large image like this. And we're going to leave some space for the score on the right-hand side, right? So we're going to kind of shift the logo off to the left just to give ourselves some space for the actual score that's going to go on here. And then we'll kind of we'll dress things up a little bit with like a glossy overlay. So this looks sort of like a glass tile with the logo on it. So we're going to go ahead and copy the logo, and we'll go ahead and make a new image. And I conveniently have this keyable reflection image. And we're going to set this to be additive. So we're going to go to its blending modes, and we're going to change it to additive so that it actually boosts the luminance of things that it's in front of, right? So it gives it that really sort of like glossy, glowing effect, right? And we're going to put that on top. And then we're going to adjust the opacity of this object so that it's far more subdued. That's a bit intense, right? So maybe like 20. Yeah, that looks okay. 30. Let's stick with 20. Okay. So there's our home team. And then we're going to go ahead and build our score, which will be just a text object. And we'll just, for simplicity's sake, we'll just use a big chunky Arial font that's all caps. And that is centered. We'll just go ahead and put this inside of our group. And we're going to put it underneath our gloss. So this is our V gloss, I guess. And then this text object is V score. So V score. And v-score we're going to position here, and we'll make it 0, sure, for now, 0. Okay, so there's our visitor score. Okay, so that's our visiting team group, right? Now, we're going to position this to the left, like that. And then we're going to make our home team group. And to make our home team group, I'm just going to copy our visiting team group. So now we have another group. We'll move it over here. And this is H team group. We'll just go ahead and rename the objects in here so we know what's what. So this is going to be H color, H logo, H score, and H gloss. And we'll just go ahead and apply different materials to these. So in our material manager, we're going to go and make a new image, and this will be our home logo, which is the Ottawa Lumberjacks. So our Ottawa primary, that's going to be our home color. We're going to make a new image that is our logo, and that will be H logo. And we're just going to flip-flop things. So if the texture coordinates for this, for our logo, were -341, I'm going to make them +341 to put the logo on the opposite side. And if our score for the visiting team, if its position was 41 on the next x-axis, I'm going to make our home position -41. Right? So now we've got our, our little scoreboard. And then in the middle, we'll make our area for the clock, and then we'll just kind of call it a day. All right. So go ahead and make another group, and this is going to be the clock group. And then inside the clock group, we're going to have a background that's going to have some kind of solid color on it. So just a new material. Maybe it'll have a gradient, actually. We'll give it like a slight gradient that kind of fades from like a light gray to a darker gray. Like this. It's our clock group. Quad is 80 tall. Okay, and then just for the heck of it, this is going to be clock BG, and then we'll put like a little glossy texture on it too. We'll put the same thing, so like clock gloss, and it will have our shiny material on it with an alpha of 20. Move it down. And we'll go ahead and build the object that will be the clock. So this will be center justified as well. So this is the clock itself. And we'll just zero this out. 0, 0, 0, 0. All right. And maybe we'll use a black font on this. So I'll just make a black material. All right, so there's our clock. Here's our very simple scoreboard. Obviously, there's a lot of work left to be done here to make this truly functional, but that's sort of not the point. So we're going to rename this. This is going to be the scoreboard. Okay. And then we're going to go into our region mapper, and we're going to build a source for the scoreboard. So we're going to add a source. Its dimensions will be 800 by 80. Okay. we'll rename this. This is going to be scoreboard. But we're going to challenge ourselves a little bit, all right? I want the scoreboard to appear. So based on how our stadium is designed, right? We want the scoreboard to appear in a position that just happens to span stripe 3 and stripe 4. So part of the scoreboard needs to be on stripe 3 and the other part of it needs to be on stripe 4, right? We just the way things worked out and visually where we wanted that scoreboard to land, we wanted it to span these two stripes. So I'm going to use some arbitrary numbers here, but we're going to say that 300 pixels are going to be on stripe 3 and the remaining 500 pixels are going to be on stripe 4. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is in our source, we're going to add some regions, 300 by 80, and that's going to be at position 0. And then we're going to add another one that's 500 by 80, and it will be positioned at 300. Okay, and we'll call this score left and score right. Okay. I can't take one source and just sort of, I guess, magically put it onto two stripes, right? So we're going to basically chop this into two sections and then render the two sections onto the two stripes, all right? So we've built our regions in our source. We've built our source and our regions. We're going to go to our destination. We're going to build the corresponding destination region. So I'm going to add 300 by 80. Okay, and then I'm just going to position this where I want it to go. So the left part of the scoreboard is going to go here. So that's going to be score left. And then we're going to add another one that's 500 by 80. And it's going to go down here onto stripe 4, beginning at 0, 0, or beginning at 0 on X, I should say. And this is going to be score right. So score left, score right. And now in our source for scoreboard, I can just route those to those two regions. Score left, score right. Okay. We're going to make sure our scoreboard has a default source in the tester tab. So we're going to set this to scoreboard. We're also going to make sure it has a default layer. Now we want the scoreboard. Well, I guess it depends, actually. It depends what you're trying to do. Do you want the scoreboard underneath your video content? Do you want it on top of your video content? Typically, like if it was a sponsorship layer or something that was looping, like looping advertisement, the scoreboard would probably be layered on top, and then cover-ups like your make noise graphic and things like that would be on a layer above. But just so we can see what we're actually doing, I'm going to put this on a layer above, and we're going to make sure that it's assigned. So our highest, our takeover layer that we were using, our full takeover layer, was assigned to 500. Okay. So I just want to make sure that this is above 500. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this on layer 501. And then we'll go into our sequencer. We're going to drop this into our sequence. Okay. And I'm going to go and show our outputs again. We're going to go ahead and start playing our clip. And then I'm going to go ahead and take our scoreboard online. And there it is, right? You can actually see it on our output. Go and show you just the outputs themselves, right? And there's our scoreboard mapped to our third output channel, and you see a portion of the scoreboard on stripe 3 and a portion of the scoreboard on stripe 4. Now, if we were to take all of this offline, and I change this layering around, and we put the scoreboard on 400, right? So now if we put the scoreboard online, it's there. If we go ahead and play our takeover, it'll actually render on top. So now the takeover is on top of our scoreboard. If we take the takeover down, we now see the scoreboard underneath. So that's our introduction to region mapping in Tessera for stadium applications. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can watch this whole thing in its entirety, or take it in step by step, starting with that first example where we're just taking that 3840 by 1080 scene and mapping it onto 2 outputs, and then sort of build yourself up to doing the ribbon mapping. But once you understand these main concepts, you can start really being creative in how you build your scenes, build your regions, and basically design the production to match the venue that you're producing in. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be talking again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
There we go. Now I'm not muted. Somehow we've got 2 Andrews there. Very interesting. At least I have 2 Andrews. Andrew, thank you again for putting all this together. And it looks like we got a couple of quick suggestions for some product features out of this, and hopefully you guys got something out of the Tessera content here that Andrew's presented. I want to quickly share my screen so that you guys can, let me get rid of the video here. We're done with that. Okay, so we've got, try to get rid of that. And let me share my desktop. I want to make sure that you guys are remembering that you can go to this particular site, which again, I'll put it in the chat tool so you'll see it there twice. This is where you will find the recordings from today's sessions and several of the other sessions that we have done in the past. So you will see them in here. For example, here's what's coming up. The same session will be repeated this afternoon. I will have this recording posted up here later this afternoon as well. And you can see we've kind of put them in. It may go and change and take off the expression you work from home series and just put the title of what they are so that you guys are aware, but they will be posted here. Also, for those of you who haven't been there yet, shame on you, but you will get to it. If you go to rossvideo.com/expression-u, you will find the section here with all the different pieces, and hopefully we will be having another tab here that will be for the Sports and Live event group, which is where Andrew is normally found working in his day. We'll have a special tab there, and you'll start to see some of that content. And you will also find in the Ross University section of the Ross Video webpage, there will probably be a new section for you guys to go and browse for things that are more pertinent to the Sports and Live event workflows that you're starting to see pop up all over the place. It doesn't look like there's any other questions, and we are coming close to the end of our time. Oh, I got one here. Oh, no problem. Matt's just giving us a thank you. Thank you, Matthew. We will keep these going. We are probably taking next week off from this series because we've got some things going on, but we will probably post some things for you guys to follow up on. Keep up on the Facebook page. For those of you who don't know, it's facebook.com/RossXPN. And that's where we also announce all these particular sessions and webinars. So you'll get this information as well. And by all means, poke at us with